Doing something for the first time is wild. And when you think of the outdoors, it's inherently wild. I think the most important thing for me is sharing an activity, sharing what I love with people that have not experienced that or have some kind of barrier related to it. The magic of being able to create that bond, that connection with an activity, a person, a place, that's special. Well, welcome in to another episode of Sincerely Yours Outdoors. How's everyone feeling? We got some friendly guests. The broski back. We're kind of matching, so
close.
Yeah, I guess.
It's making things difficult for me. That's
yeah,
for sure.
We're getting there.
First time meeting, not Zach.
No, this is Zach. First time meeting Zach.
I've never been called
Zachary, Zachariah.
ever in my entire life.
Zacchaeus.
Never.
Yeah.
What else can we come with?
Yeah, no, that's a good one.
Derek.
How you doing, Derek?
I'm good, man. Travel was nice. No interruptions for travel, despite coming from Pittsburgh, which is like never happens. So yeah, feeling good.
Yeah.
How are you all feeling today?
Great.
Yeah, nice and warm. Jimmy got this fire going for us.
Yeah. Fire God. Thank you, Jimmy.
I made myself useful.
Yeah, very useful. We are warm here. So we are with Jimmy and Lydia, two friends, colleagues, inspirations to me. So I see it. You're kind of skeptical.
No, it's good. I just remembered when I looked at the questions list earlier, it said, who is your hero in the outdoors? And I was like, well, I have to say Marcus.
Oh my
and
God.
now I can't say that
Cut
you're
it
my
out.
hero if you just said that we're your inspiration.
I beat you to the punch, right? It's like, saw it coming. We want to turn the table over to you to introduce yourself and kind of tell us more about where we are. I mean, it's super cozy inside, but I'm sure everyone will see the exterior at some point today, but very meaningful spot. So, Jimmy, you want to tell us where we are?
I'm Jimmy Flatt. We are at the Moses Coulee Preserve in Central Washington on our Western Hunting Program for Hunters of Color.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have much to add to where we are other than it's a really beautiful, magical place. Assuming there'll be some B-roll in here, that'll be great. But beautiful, I'm looking out over the water and this amazing rock formation from the glacial, cuts that went through here in the ravine. And just a really beautiful, magical place to be able to come out and do our programming for Hunters of Color, like Jimmy mentioned. Jimmy and I are co-founders of Hunters of Color, connecting people of color to sustainable food, traditions of hunting through heritage, and also to just the mental health benefits of being outdoors through hunting and fishing and conservation. And that's been a big passion of ours. We founded it about 3 years ago. I'm currently the CEO. Jimmy's the COO. And beyond that, I am also a podcaster. I started a wine podcast. I'm a mushroom forager. I'm a bird watcher. I'm trying to tee y'all up for any other questions about the outdoors. And yeah, I'm from the Walker Mohawk Band of Six Nations of the Grand River. I'm Ganyangeaka. And that's kind of like my roots and why the outdoors mean so much to me, especially this land.
For sure. And we're going to dive into that for sure. And coming in today, even though you don't care much about it, I looked at these rocks and said, I kind of want to climb those. So
I was afraid that the
Yeah.
second you said rock climbing, I was like, this is dangerous. Don't.
there's always someone. But yeah, this is beautiful land. I'm honored just to be here and really happy to spend it with you both and the organization and the people that we're going to meet tonight. So thank you for extending that invitation, most importantly. So.
Yeah, Marcus talks about kind of like the connection to the space. You all, of course, have highlighted somewhat of a connection that we'll dive into further as to like the space. But outside of that, what are you all consuming and connecting to nowadays? This can be like audio, digital, video, whatever that may be. What are you all consuming at this current stage?
Man, I have no time to consume anything.
Yikes, that makes me feel like I'm wasting time because
Well,
I've
let me
been
tell
doing
you.
all kinds of stuff.
I guess on the drive over here, we were listening to some comedians, and then we just finished Lydia's true crime series, The Fall. I guess that's like when we do have time to consume stuff, it's just like an hour or two of TV.
Which is like, I used to almost feel bad. I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm like binge watching this TV show. But then someone told me that, you know, where we came from, where we all came from was sitting around a campfire at some point and like telling stories and like sharing, you know, legends and making everyone excited. There'd always be storytellers, right? And so I feel like producers and people who like make podcasts or like make TV shows or whatever are the people telling us stories now. And it's like we're sitting around a campfire, sitting around a TV, able to, you know, kind of relax and listen to someone else tell a story. So anyways, yeah, The Fall's been a TV show that we've just finished. It's like a British Northern Ireland like crime thing from 2013. It was pretty trippy. It was pretty good. But in all of my spare time, I've been reading They're There by Tommy Orange, and it's such a unique book because it has like all these different perspectives of Native kids growing up in Oakland. And I'm almost done with it. I got like I don't ever look at how many pages are left, or else I'll like try to like race myself to the end and won't enjoy it. But I've got like that much left in it, and it's really good. I recommend it. A little like traumatic, but it's good. I think especially non-native should read it to get some context. And then I just picked up a book called The Only Good Indians, and it's like a hunting lodge like set crime thriller thing novel, but it's like a bunch of natives like hunting, and so I thought it'd be a good context here, but also the horror aspect might not be good for me to start reading it at this lodge, but we'll see.
Okay. I like where this is going. We have so many offshoots that we can just talk about at this point. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And it's awesome to hear kind of what you're experiencing, listening to, engaging with. So that's really great. We wanted to kind of kick things off with more background and experience that you have outdoors. You know, everyone has an outdoor story. It started somewhere. You both are West Coast based. That's kind of been home space for you. How did you find yourself outside young, and has it evolved to where we are today? Maybe that's the kind of impetus to what you do today.
Yeah, so this is definitely the context. We were kind of joking about the book earlier. Jimmy was like, I didn't even know about the book. It's because I had blocked the book out of my memories because as a little kid, I was one of 2 Native kids at my entire school. And I mean, we lived in Oregon, of all places, not super diverse. But I didn't really have much of a connection here because I didn't grow up on the reservation where my family's from. And so for me, there were a lot of things that I wasn't finding in community, like in friends. So I just kind of delved into the outdoors as a child. And not to get too like deep or into, you know, traumas or anything, but I was abused physically as a child until I was about 7 years old. And so not having friends, not having anything else, I really clung to the outdoors. And it was when I was about 6 or 7, my Uncle John gifted me a nature book, and it's literally just like little drawings of animals and plants of the Pacific Northwest. And it's like this green book about this thick. It's got little pictures of mushrooms. It's got their Latin names, and it's got like what we all call them, just like daily vernacular. And I carried that book around with me everywhere I went. Like all of my little kid pictures, there's me carrying this nature book just in case I had to identify something for somebody. And so I would do this all the time. And it was like my comfort, other kids have like a comfort blankie. I would have like a comfort book. And so it just made me such a like nerd as like a small child. But that's what got me into like, looking at cool mushrooms or plants and birds especially. I loved bird watching. I took bird watching classes. Like you'd think you could just like go outside and be like, oh, look, a bird. But no, I took classes and got super into it. And I think it really like helped, save me even like as a young kid, dealing with some really awful things. I was able to have a release. And even still, like today, I woke up kind of on the wrong side of the bed and I walked outside here on this beautiful preserve and I was like, everything's gonna be okay. I took a deep breath and just listened to the birds, listened to 3 things I could hear and like 3 things I could feel, that whole thing. Kind of grounded myself and like took slow, meaningful steps. And yeah, I let nature kind of be my meditation now. And yeah, beat that.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Good luck, Jimmy.
Well, I guess my story starts in California. My dad is ex-military. My mom is an immigrant, and we would go camping as a family when I was younger. My dad was always outdoors, so we'd pick up the fishing rods, we'd try to fish, and yeah, I was always outdoors, going to places in the Sierra Nevadas, Northern California, along like in the Mendocino County, up 101. I mean, there was a ton of places. I was in Boy Scouts, always playing sports, and that kind of like took me away from the outdoors a little bit. And when my sports career ended, I gravitated back towards the outdoors and recreating. And the way I found myself recreating the most and most intimately was while hunting. And I guess like the light bulb moment was when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and it was the 3rd time that my parents had to call the sheriffs to try to figure out where I was because I missed my curfew. Usually it was like when the sun goes down, you're back home and you have to be ready for dinner. And we lived so close to the creek that I would just walk along the creek and I'd be chasing animals and sometimes try to catch fish with my bare hands or whatever. But on the 3rd time, they're like, this kid's gonna get lost one of these days for good. So we need to like channel this energy. And so they called up a family friend of ours who was a hunter, who had been thinking that I should get into it. And so me and my dad went out for the first time when I was 8 or 9 years old. And I wasn't hunting, but I was just observing. And when I held that duck that they'd shot for the first time, and then when it came to the dinner table, that's when I was like, okay, this is something that I can kind of dedicate myself to and feed my family. And it turns out there's a bunch of benefits, like Lydia was talking about, mental, physical, and emotional too, to just be outdoors and engage with nature in that way.
yeah, for sure.
I think that's so like interesting to see, kind of like Jimmy, you talking about hunting as a child, and then Lydia, you talking about like your origin of being outdoors and not mentioning hunting. Like how did that curiosity start for you, Jimmy, and like kind of patching that together with you as well, Lydia? Like where did that start for you, which seems to be at 2 different times and 2 different spots of origin?
Yeah, I can say that it started with like culture and like upbringing and hearing stories of my family hunting and fishing. And on my dad's side, my grandpa was an avid fisherman, but stopped taking my dad and his brother out because they were too loud. And then on my mom's side, I grew up with stories like my grandpa and all of my uncles and aunts in Venezuela going out and like going like pig hunting and bringing home meat for these big like family gatherings. And I don't know, I just was always intrigued by that. And I mean, a lot of kids grow up with like I think my book that I read was My Side of the Mountain, and it's this kid who goes and gets lost, hollows out this tree, gets into falconry, and like these stories kind of shaped my interest in the outdoors, and it all kind of revolved around hunting and like feeding yourself, and so that was where my interests lie. And like I would also recreate and do like wake sports, mountain biking, trail running, backpacking. I mean, you name it, I've tried it, but everything kind of I've always gravitated towards the hunting side of stuff.
But it's interesting, Zach, that you asked that, like where that difference is, like how Jimmy got into it at a younger age. And he didn't mention the story that I always loved, this visual of you shaking in your waders as a little kid.
Oh yeah. Well, so we had a yellow lab. His name was Kimosabi, who's
So
my guide as a as a youngster, and it was his first time hunting too that same day, and both of us had just like the instinct to do it. And so when the bird hit the water, he went and he retrieved it for us. And then like she was saying I was shivering because I was in a leaky pair of waders and they're full up to here. So like I wasn't
You were
dry.
floating.
So you were just standing in the water.
Yeah. And it's like 30 degrees in the Central Valley of California. I'm just like, but it hooked me. It's ingrained.
Yeah, but like that's what's so interesting to me because like I didn't have any of that growing
Right.
up, right? And I mentioned, so my family's from the Six Nations, the Grand River Reserve in Ontario, but I didn't grow up on the reservation, and neither did my dad. My dad actually grew up in Los Angeles, and to this day, my dad has not had really interest in hunting, but especially not in like being around firearms because he grew up in a city, and he's like, yeah, people who I knew and like friends that I had that had firearms didn't have them for hunting. Like it was
Yeah.
definitely more nefarious reasons, and so he always grew up with kind of like this fear, and kind of instilled that in me as well. So I didn't really grow up hunting. I learned how to fish at a very young age, and I'm really grateful for my family that taught me that. But when I first met Jimmy and Thomas, who I mentioned earlier, or I mentioned my quick hits, if that's supposed to be later, sorry. But Thomas Steiner is one of our co-founders. Their connection to hunting, like these stories about growing up with this connection to the land, really inspired me to want to connect because, you know, all the things that I love doing, like mushroom hunting or bird watching or just hiking, being in nature, spending time with my dog, I can do those things while I'm hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And I can also be providing for food for my family, and I could also be making sustainable choices and not eating from factory farm meats, you know, and and also I can do this thing that I think feels so innately human, because all of us, like we wouldn't be sitting here on these couches right now if your family wasn't good at hunting at one point, if my family wasn't good at hunting at one point, if your family wasn't good at hunting at some point in our history. So it feels like such a grounding way to reconnect to how we should be and how we should behave as humans. And again, like especially as an Indigenous person on this land, it's something that my family's been doing here since the beginning of time, you know. So I was kind of their first proof of concept, they would say, as like someone who's interested in learning how to hunt, who has these like ancestral traditions and like desires to get out there, but I wouldn't know where to start. And so I was kind of this proof of concept of like, okay, here's how you buy a license. Here's how you do your first like safety trainings. Like here's how you get your hunter's ed. Like all of these different things. And so I was the proof of concept, and that's how we built the mentorship program then around that idea of community and having mentors to guide you through it.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been able to see that, so that's really awesome. I think you both, at least from my perspective, as kind of being someone on the outside looking in, are redefining the ethos of hunting more broadly. Because I kind of translate it to the sector and the spaces that I'm in terms of either rock climbing, you know, camping. A lot of the moments that are sought and like spoken about are almost hero journeys a lot of the times. You know, like people are going out to discover themselves or a rock, which I think it has an important space. But what you're doing for the community in terms of our identities is bringing people together in saying like we deserve access to these things. We
Yeah.
deserve mentorship, collaboration, and mutual support because all those things that you referenced as far as like feeding our families or doing conservation work to preserve this space for our kids and their kids is something that's rarely spoken about, and you're highlighting that. So I want to say thank you to that, but also the program that you're doing today and kind of what we're experiencing. How are you bringing all of that together, and how is that kind of sequenced out? I know we know because we've spoken kind of before this of, oh, this is not just the first time we've got together, but like, can you speak to that a little bit more and how people can expect to see Hunters of Color in the future?
Yeah. I want to turn this back a little bit too, where
That was really
yeah,
a large
where-
question. So like dissect that how you want.
yeah. I think the thing like that I heard all the time growing up kind of alludes to this, that there's a lot of like all this hunting, wild game, it's held in the public trust. And we're part of the public. And so we have the rights to access it, but a lot of us just don't know how, don't know where to start. And growing up, when I started getting into hunting, I wanted all my friends to also be a part of it as well, because I was like loving it so much. I was finding so much joy. I invite my best friends, other black and brown folks, and say, hey, like, come do this with me and my dad. And they'd be like, no, man, that's not something we do. Or that's a white man thing. And it made me so mad growing up, because I was like, no, I'm like, me and my dad are clearly doing it. You can come with us, and like your parents know my parents, and they know that we're safe. Like bring the whole family too. Like let's just do it. And it was like the hardest barrier to break through. And so that kind of culminated into this organization. It festered for years and years, I guess. And go ahead.
Well,
Trying to tag herself there. She's like,
you see
let
me
me
holding
go.
myself back though? I was like,
I have something to say.
yeah. Well, no, and like it festered for years and years. Like that's a funny story too, because Jimmy and Thomas drove me nuts talking about this for so long. They're like I heard, how many times I hear like Thomas be like, I've never seen another black man while hunting, or Jimmy be like, yeah, it's weird, right? And then like these statistics came out in 2016 that said that 97% of hunters identify as white. Right? And so whenever I say that, like people, no one's like that shocked. 89% identify as male. And so one of my favorite ways to like introduce this, and kind of something you alluded to a second ago, one of my favorite ways to introduce what we do and why we do it, I'll be like, hey, picture a hunter. Like if I'm meeting a new person, but picture a hunter. Okay? Who'd you picture? And most people are like, oh, like Elmer Fudd, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, but you didn't picture me? And they're like, no. Like, no, of course not. And so there has been this like stereotype. And so that's even like, oh no, it's not for us, or like that's not something we do. That's been like built up because of the stereotype in and of itself, but also some like the negative connotations. Like you were saying, like we are trying to redefine what hunting is. We're trying to, I always say we're trying to decolonize hunting. We're trying to bring it back to what it is, which is communion with nature, giving back to nature through conservation, like recognizing that we are supposed to live with these animals and like in these spaces in the outdoors, instead of like dominion over nature, like we see so often in other like more broad and like mainstream hunting culture. You see a lot of trophy hunting and what have you, and that's just like so the antithesis of what we're doing. But to pitch it back to Jimmy, if it's okay, really quick, our motto is the outdoors are for everyone, and that's like that's what we believe. It's what we're standing for, and that's what kind of became the culmination of Hunters of Color and why we do what we do.
Yeah. Another thing I heard a lot growing up was, do you eat what you kill or what you shoot? So that's like, there's like a lack of education around what hunting is as well. It's like, it's a sustainable way of procuring meat.
But why is that an important question? Sorry, I'm doing their job. Like, why do people ask that? What do they not know?
Well, they don't know that there's a bunch of regulations around hunting.
Lydia's so joyful. She's like,
I know.
she's like a proud mom.
Hyping her man up. Let's go, Jimmy.
hype woman. But yeah, there's regulations that are set in place so that we never lose our ability to feed ourselves. And there was a point in this point in time in this country where there were no regulations, and there were things that were atrocities to humans that were done to the animals. And so we've corrected a little bit, and we're on this path to be more conservation minded. And when we get more folks into hunting, which is our mission, is to get more people into hunting or conservation through hunting. The end goal is to be a conservationist. And what a conservationist is somebody who is always looking towards the future and wanting the environment to be better for future generations, is giving back more than what they're taking, is finding a way to be involved, whether that's with your time, your money, or your activism. And if you have no connection to these resources that are supposed to be held in the public trust, then why would you advocate for them? Why would you care for them? And it's kind of this double-edged sword, like history set us up for where we are today. So now how do we address that? And we're addressing that through our programming. And one of those programs is where we're at right now, which is the Western Hunting Program. We bring out, this year was 8 individuals to essentially it's a 2-week course, 1 week in the spring, 1 week in the fall, which is right now. And it walks everyone through land navigation, tracking, identification, scouting virtually and in person, planning hunts, making sure that you're going to be first aid safe if you ever had an emergency. And then there's firearm safety that's involved, and there's backpacking skills. And so it makes a well-rounded individual who has like the baseline skills. They go back during the summer, they have homework assignments to build upon those skills, and really what you're building is confidence. And then you have the confidence to come in the fall and be at a hunt camp and go and try to procure meat. And we're building community too. So like all these individuals that are together, like when you guys meet them, they're like family members. You won't know that they've only spent a couple weeks together. But it's a weird bond that you create with hunting buddies. You're outdoors, you're in I would say a semi-volatile situation. It'd be similar to like rock climbing. If you're relying on somebody who has your life in their hands, like your belaying person. And it's the same thing with hunting. Like you're relying on that partner, the mentor, the hunting buddy, to not only be support, but if you do find success, to help you pull that resource out of the woods and back to the freezer or the dinner table. But yeah, it's all about creating advocates for conservation and people who are invested in this resource.
You thought your question was long.
No, this is important. And one thing that I am catching on to that I want to point out and kind of dive a little into, or we can just kind of gloss over, the approach of you both describing an animal is more than just an animal, which, again, kind of referencing back to previous ideologies and kind of what was in the public perception is like an animal is an animal. That's all it is. It's meant to be, taken or, multiple ways to perceive that. But you're visualizing it with more and representing it with more respect.
Oh, yeah.
And as a resource. So,
well, I want Jimmy to
appreciate you doing
share,
that.
I mean, like, maybe even like the prayer and like the emotion behind like when you do harvest an animal. But
Give us some historical context.
well, yeah, for me, like, so in our culture, we say we have an agreement with nature. We'll take care of our mother, the earth, and she'll take care of us. And that's so important because if you look at how game lands are managed, often too, our communities, indigenous communities, do so well at that reciprocal nature, right? The giving back, and therefore the animals are healthier, the habitats are healthier, and it's all just so ingrained in us to treat all living things with respect. In Mohawk, we have the Ohondong Gariwatikwan, which is the opening address or the Thanksgiving address, and we're supposed to start off any gathering for thousands of years. We're supposed to start off any gathering of Haudenosaunee or other Iroquois with this Ohondong Gariwatikwan and give thanks to everything from like the bugs to the grass to the trees to the animals to the foods. And it's something that's so ingrained in me to think about animals in that way. There's nothing I hate more than the callousness of like someone who just shoots something and they're like, heck yeah, brother, like look what I did, you know?
Yeah.
And without the respect for that creature that just gave its life. Anytime you eat meat, by the way, this is like my little soapbox. Anytime you eat meat, something died for you to be able to eat that. It doesn't matter if you get it from the grocery store, McDonald's, what have you. And we're choosing to eat hunter-tarian. We do this thing at our home, at least, where we don't eat food that we haven't procured ourselves, because I want to know the animal. I want to know where it came from. I want to have respect for it as a living thing that did die, that I'm going to consume, and then give back to that land in a way that I can make sure that those animals be protected for the next generation to be able to do the same reciprocal thing that we've done for thousands of years. Off my soapbox. Back to you, Jimmy. Maybe just like about like the prayer.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, Lydia comes from a long tradition of hunters, and I do too, but I was severed from that connection. And so historically, there's these prayers that you would say when you're harvesting or like saying thanks. And there's traditions that have been passed down for thousands of years, and there's newer traditions. And so since I was severed from that hunting culture just by one generation, I had to develop my own prayer. And so I have a prayer that I say each time I harvest, and it's my way of giving thanks to the life that was given to me to continue my life. And it's like, I'm not gonna say it, but it's an homage to like saying thanks, and then I'm gonna see them again. So they're not just an object. There's a spirit that lives on, and it's gonna live on through me, and eventually I'll be rejoined with them in the afterlife.
Yeah, it's important to share.
It's deep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
A little deeper than rolling through McDonald's. Makes you think about it a
sure.
little bit. Like, also, I have pet chickens. Like, it's made me not be able to eat chicken from the grocery store. Like, anytime people are like, oh, you hunt, you must hate animals, or like, you must like hurting animals. I'm like, no, I love animals.
Yeah.
Like, that's the reason I'm able to hunt, is because I'm choosing to not eat from factory farms where they're like cramped in little cages their entire lives, you know? They're out in the wild, and there's like very strict regulations, like Jimmy was alluding to, about like how old they have to be, how big they have to be, for you to even fish. You know, it's the same kind of thing. You have to be able to harvest in an ethical way, and if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be hunting.
Yeah.
And that's like exactly kind of like the concept that I wanted to jump into, is like mainstream hunting culture that has been established as to like what you all are articulating. You know, I'm sure as like many people will be viewing this episode, are like just going to be in a posture that I'm in, of like, wow, you know, of knowing that this kind of like grace is being exhibited and provided as it relates to such. How all are you like amplifying that? Because I mean, that's not the posture of mainstream hunting culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like,
I think it's easy though for us to do, because it's like it's culturally specific. And
correct.
when I grew up, when I was 8 years old and watching like the Outdoor Channel for the first time, there's like these shows where they go and all they're doing is showing the killing
Oh yeah,
aspect.
for sure.
They're not showing the processing the meat. And like that has started to change in the mainstream media around hunting, which I'm like super grateful for, because we need to be telling more of the food and like the end stories versus just like the procurement aspect.
Yep.
And that, I think that's what give hunting a bad lens for a long time. It's just like the killing, and that's all it was. And that's probably where that question came from too. Do you eat what you kill? And so yeah, I think just cultural significance too, that we are doing this. It is something you can do sustainably. You can do it ethically. And it is a way. It's also like, not everybody can hunt. We understand that. And it's not even like reasonable for us to think that everybody can go and eat hunter-tarian. There's not enough animals on the landscape for that. But if you are looking for a way to be more conscientious about where your meat comes from, this might be an option, or it could be an option, because we've been eating hunter-tarian in our household. I'll say that when we travel, it's really hard to do that. And it's been like almost a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah. Another thing I'd say too about how we talk about this and are trying to change the narrative around the harvest and around hunting. Whenever I talk to new people about what we do and why we do it, and I ask people to picture a hunter, another thing that I always say to new folks is whatever it is that you hate about hunting, when I say I'm a hunter and your like skin, back of your neck kind of pricks up, I hate that too. Like whatever it is that's making you uncomfortable, I promise that I'm disgusted by it also. And I just always like to put that out there and be like, that's the reason we have to exist, right? There are so many things that need to change in this realm. And it often feels like we're in between a rock and a hard place, like there's 2 rocks and 2 hard places. Hold on.
And they're like coming at
yeah. And we're Indiana Jones. No, but there's a whole like group of people who are like super pro hunting. But then the second we start talking about racial equity and like racial justice in the outdoors and making sure that all of us, all people, see ourselves represented in the outdoors, they don't like that so much. And then there's a whole sect of people who are like, oh yeah, like I'm all about indigenous sovereignty. I'm all about like environmental justice. And then we bring up hunting and they're like, oh wait, like none of that. And so we really are like in this really interesting niche that like we're constantly like, it's funny too because people will be like, oh, I bet vegans hate you. And I'm like, no, actually for the most part, vegans are like really cool because they're like, hey, you love animals too? Like you want them to be treated better? Cool, like that, I'm all about that. And a lot of times too, they're like, more open to the idea of like the indigenous sovereignty aspect. Like if I'm talking about hunting, I'm not talking about putting a trophy on a wall. I'm talking about, feeding my family in the way that my body actually needs, And so that's been a really interesting, conversation because people do have all kinds of different ideas. We all come from different worldviews, right? And
For sure.
have different axioms around these things, but.
And it sounds like the tenet of which, like your approach being centered around education. It's like we all have these like preconceived notions and perhaps like historically, perhaps like re-ingrained and reaffirmed as well that you all are like addressing within education as it relates to people across the continuum. But largely, I think it starts with like people's positionality, like their willingness to explore, which I think goes hand in hand with like the mission that you all are executing as well. Like, how are you like further nourishing that curiosity for some? Because I know it's like, and Jimmy, I think you mentioned this as well. It's like everyone that starts doesn't finish. Perhaps at some point in time they're like, I'll go to this point. Perhaps it's like handling a weapon or like a gun at that point in time. It's like this is it. But thanks for all the education,
Right.
And that perhaps that changes, the way in which they look and they shift their lens, so to speak. Like, I don't want to say is there value because there's certainly value within that. But like, how all are you meeting people where they're at, more or less?
Yeah, every individual that we reach is important.
Certainly.
And even if they're not going to be hunters for the rest of their life, they're going to be advocates, potentially, for everybody else to do the same thing. And so, should we give it audio time? Yeah, so the way that we're reaching those individuals where they're at is by creating these drawn out programs where there are programs that we've kind of steered away from that are sink or swim style.
Yep.
And within a weekend, you're picking up a weapon for potentially the first time, and the next day you're being tasked with taking a life. And we've actually seen that be detrimental to the like retention and long-term success of these individuals. And so we try to draw everything out and build community first. So you are kind of mentally getting yourself ready. You're around people who are already successful hunters, people who have gone through this process before in their lifetimes, and you can ask those questions too. Like, hey, after your first harvest, how did you feel? And so all of our community events that take place across the country, they're state-based. There's 4 of them. Starts with building community. Then you go into a lot of education. The next 2 portions are education. There's conservation events that are intertwined in there, so giving back before you ever take. And so if you get through the first 3 parts of our prescribed series, you're doing more than most people are for conservation. And the last part of that is the taking portion, where you're actually being extractive of the resource. So our programs kind of fit. I feel like I've built them out enough to where, like in a way that you can join at any point and kind of figure out where you want to be. If you're on a 2-year course, then you don't have to go to the hunting portion that year, but maybe the next year you'll be ready. And then you'll go through those motions that you need to go through to be ethical. So being proficient with your weapon, giving back to the land, being an active community member. There's all these different things that are in place to.
And I'll be quick here, surprisingly. I'm known for my verbosity, but just 2 things. One, like you mentioned, like it might be your first time handling a firearm. One thing I love teaching people is like you don't have to use a firearm to hunt. Like we both love bow hunting.
Yeah.
You know, we can feel way more tradish too. You know, by not having to use a firearm. So like you don't have to do that. A lot of people don't realize that, right? And then the other thing, like there's 100% there's value in people learning about why we're doing what we're doing and coming and joining, even if it's just them learning that they can't pull the trigger, they can't let go, they can't release the arrow, because that will teach them maybe they don't want to eat meat, you know, maybe they don't have that in them to take a life, and that's I think really worth people learning that. Also learning like survival skills, like I was telling Marcus earlier, like all the folks who are coming out here are people of color who can now, if push comes to shove, feed their families, like no matter what, like they have the survival skills to be able to take care of their own. So
Yeah.
it's worth it, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of the modules that you educate on, this is probably like a larger question, but what inspired you to create those? Was it a connection or the experience that you had with your family that was like, I had a mentor, I had an individual that invested that time into me, and I know there's a gap now, and this is how we fill it. Is that the experience you had?
100%. And it was, if this organization existed, or these not even this organization, but these resources existed through other means, I would have 100% utilized them. And I think the biggest gap was the community aspect, and just not seeing myself represented and not having friends see themselves represented and feeling like they had a welcoming place to go to. And I never want other individuals to have to wade through those dirty waters. And so I've kind of done that and I hopefully I'm the last person to have to navigate it on my own, where we get enough people to show people the ropes, and people can start writing their own prayers and reconnecting to that part of their culture and passing it on to the next generation. And the organization doesn't have to be that conduit. People are just doing it naturally, the way it's been done for millennia.
Our goal is to not have to exist,
For sure.
right?
That's a goal of nonprofit
I've
work,
said
right?
that.
Yeah.
Just to,
Yeah. And so I think that's the other benefit, right? As when you're asking about like even if we don't, create a hunter, we can't create a hunter out of everyone we meet, but at least if we can reach folks and be like, this is for you if you choose to do it. There is another way to choose to eat more sustainable if you want to do so. And even like, educating the voting bloc, to be like pro conservation, like not just because it can feel so intimidating, like, oh, I don't want to vote for this like pro hunting thing, like they're killing animals, but like y'all live in one of the most overrun deer, I think the highest deer population, if I'm correct, in that part of in Pennsylvania. And just recognizing that, like, we don't all have that experience in Oregon. Sometimes we wish we had more deer, like y'all did. But like how it spreads disease, like ticks and things like that too. And so how it really is an aspect of conservation that we're hopefully encouraging everyone to be more open to thinking for voting sakes. And then on the other side of that too, we have a anti-racism in the outdoors course too that our board members and we teach. That's hopefully, showing people how we got to where we are today and how it wasn't an accident, and why it's so important to ensure that all of us and all of our kids see themselves represented in the outdoors and any outdoor activity.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to circle back to one thing that you said, just to bring this home for people that are in Pittsburgh. Riverview Park is a great example where we're overpopulated with deer, and they're eating vegetation in the root system where landslides are obliterating the park. You know, it's a public infrastructure crisis in that space, and it's facilitated by overpopulation. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring that home for everyone in Pittsburgh. That's like, oh well, how does that look like in our backyard? Well, there it is. You know? And I wanted to ask. This is probably a larger question, but you talked about the anti-racism program and education that is now being facilitated through HOC. What does critical mass look like for us?
Well, I don't know what that term is.
When
Like the tipping point of
when have
participation.
you when have you reached the point where you're like, we've accomplished our mission?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, sorry. I was about to say I have a degree in history, a degree in engineering. Should have probably just let him answer.
Jimmy, there was your chance.
Carry the two. That's Lydia.
How's this going on?
Lydia's
in my
like
brain?
Zach Galifianakis right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, absolutely. Anyways, the critical mass is when the hunting demographics match the demographics of the United States. Because research shows that it's not that people of color aren't interested. The most recent data showed that they polled youth, and they asked, white youth, Asian youth, indigenous youth, black youth, Latino or Latinx youth, and if they're interested in learning how to hunt. And all of them said yes at different levels, but like indigenous kids, what was it like?
Like 60%.
Yeah, are interested, but like maybe don't have the resources or the infrastructure to be able to do that. And so our goal is to make sure that they do have the infrastructure, they do have the resources. We do have the infrastructure and resources. And I think what we're seeing now is a positive trend. There are more people claiming space and taking up space in the outdoors in all different realms, which is beautiful to see. And yeah, we would not have to exist if there wasn't a problem. Like I said, Jimmy's an engineer, and so he saw this and was like, oh, there's a problem that needs solving.
Brings me back to like meeting where people are at. It's very rare to have an individual go from no recreation at all to want to be a hunter. There's usually, like 90% of the time, there's a recreation activity that somebody is heavily invested in that has led to hunting. And I say that because we need all these other activities to kind of feed into what we're doing too. We need people to be hiking. We need people to be backpacking and kayaking, and getting to a point where hunting seems within the realm of possibility.
It's all something too for this program, like where we are today, like in a beautiful, cozy little cabin. We actually like taught people how to camp. We take those things for granted, folks like us who are like out in the outdoors, but like, well, I remember one of the first programs we did, we were in New York in the middle of, was it November, in the middle of New York, and it was freezing, and folks came out in like mesh Nike shoes and jeans, and we were like, oh, we didn't tell people how to dress.
Yeah.
We didn't suggest like layers. We didn't even go through like a layering process, like things that we just took as axiomatic, right? We're like, oh, this is how you do this. But now we've learned like there are so many things that once you teach people how to wear the right clothes when they go out for comfort, for their comfort's sake, they're gonna enjoy the outdoors so much more. And that's for like hiking or rock climbing or camping or kayaking, whatever it is. Like, so we start with those like base levels, and that's also the added benefit of teaching people, even if they don't end up being a hunter.
Yeah. Do you have words of advice for people that, maybe seeing this episode for the first time and they're just like, this is my first exposure to hunting, or this is like building my archetype and profile of like what I think hunting is. Or even those that may have a base knowledge of hunting, but no one in their circle that has a mentor that, can lead them to say like, come with me.
Yeah.
Like words of advice that you would share with those people?
Yeah, I think for me, yours I'm sure will be more practical, but for me, it's definitely something that I wouldn't have even been interested if I didn't know like my family's history, my culture's history when it comes to actually procuring food for ourselves and doing so in a sustainable and respectful way. So I would encourage everyone to like ask your grandpa, ask your uncle, talk to your grandma about any unique foods that they've ever eaten. A lot of times people too have hunting in their backgrounds and don't even realize it. Like, oh yeah, of course, like we would eat we would eat venison pot pies. But like, where'd that venison come from? Oh, you shot that, grandma? You know, like, a lot of people don't even realize it. And so I think it's like worth just asking the questions for any part of like your culture, obviously too. Like, dive into that. It's worth it.
For sure.
I think I would say I'm probably not the only person who has felt the benefits of hunting and wanted to pass that on to somebody else and bring somebody else in. And for me, it was my parents asking somebody that they knew to teach me and my dad. And so like, my mom was the catalyst for that. But like, you could also be the catalyst for yourself. There's programs like ours. There's also just like people that you know, or colleagues or somebody within your realm of influence might know somebody who is willing, because I mean, I think it is contagious. It's something that you want to pass on, and even if they don't get to the point of hunting, they're getting to the point where they're shooting guns, and they have those skills available to them, even if they never intend to use them. So just ask or look into programs like ours, and find mentors, find community.
We have a membership platform, connects mentors with mentees all over the nation. So people can sign up anywhere and be like, hey, I'm in Pittsburgh. Oh, Marcus is in Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
Let's go hunting, Marcus.
Yeah.
Or Zach.
I knew it was coming. I was just,
Same.
just sitting here. Just like,
Zach will indeed be on the platform.
I was in a posture to receive
We'll
what you were
plug him
sharing.
in. With that being said, though, I think sometimes, like, I find myself sometimes taking it for granted too. Is like, I always ask people like, "Oh, who's your mentor?" and like nudge that question, but that's never reciprocated to me. Like, who's feeding me?
Oh.
So I would kind of ask the same of you, like who's feeding you specifically, either through the activity of recreational feat of hunting, or just individually, that's like helping you grow to be the greatest leader that you are for Hunters of Color. This is
Physically,
for both of you.
feeding us like with meat, it's us. We procure the meat for ourselves.
No,
but
not feeding
I know,
Jimmy.
but I'm
He's weaving this into his story.
Yeah. But I think it's the mentees and like seeing like folks taking that leap and saying like, okay, I'll try this. Because when I was little and asking my friends, it was just like there was a hard, solid wall that was there that was like, no, I'm not doing this at all. And now that wall is kind of starting to crumble, and people are starting to move past that and try it. Yeah. And when I see like, I mean, yesterday Anthony came in with a deer, and he's like telling everybody the story. He's like, that like gets me so juiced, that like this thing that started when I was younger, this passion is now like spreading into other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that for me, there's clearly like mentors like Jimmy and Thomas, my cousin, my uncle, like people who have come around me to be like, oh yeah, like I'll help you on your journey, because I've only been hunting for like 5 or 6 years now. And so I still feel young and there's still so much to learn. So I definitely have like those physical people, but also just like I'm so inspired by anyone who is going out of their way to say, you know, you might not have seen me in this space, but I belong in this space. So there's like Native Women's Wilderness, Alex Troutman, who, if you guys don't have him on your list, I'm just gonna give him a shout out at Nature Owl on Instagram, N8 at Nature Owl. Anyways,
With the handle.
Yeah, with the handle. He doesn't even pay me. He probably should. But everyone should go check out his Instagram, just because like he grew up. He's got this whole story. He could tell it better than I could. But he grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and he had never even considered that he could like become head of a field or work in the conservation field. Like he could become a biologist, and now he's a bird biologist, and he just posts pictures of cool ass birds all day. Sorry for cussing. And so I just get so excited whenever I like open Instagram and he's like smiling, talking about birds, and he's just bringing black joy to my timeline. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that is so empowering, like that we can do that too. And so it encourages me, like you said, like to be a better leader. Like it encourages me, like make it about the joy, make it about the experience, make it about the benefits of being outside. make it real.
Mm-hmm.
Could not agree more. Could
Most
not agree
certainly.
more.
How can people stay connected to
For
Hunters
sure.
of Color? I mean, we've been hinting around it, but like,
Yeah.
how can people stay connected? How can they find more info?
Especially us East Coast people.
Yeah,
Yes.
you can follow it on all social media. It's just at Hunters of Color. The website's huntersofcolor.org. You can become a member for as little as $4 a month and connect to community members across the nation, and then mentors that are in your area that have gone through training, who are actively ready and willing to accept a mentee to bring them into the space.
That's important.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
For sure.
They've gone through a whole they go through our safety training, they go through an anti-racism training before they're even able to mentor folks. So
That's excellent.
yeah.
Your next trip. So we're kind of coming to the end. I think this trip that we've like relatively experienced has been really great. What's the next trip? It can be through Hunters of Color. It can be just a personal trip. Like, what do you both have on the calendar? Would you like to share?
So the ambassador training is coming up. We have what we call community leaders. They're Hunters of Color ambassadors. They're chapters, like state chapters, but they're communities. It's like feels so much like chapter feels like so, I don't know, formal, but they're communities, right? And so they're people who we like work with in person to make sure that they are doing the prescribed for, like Jimmy can talk more about it. But that's gonna be next month in California. We're bringing all of our state ambassadors together and gearing them up to then be the best leaders they can be for their communities.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and they'll go across the country leading these events for folks to get their toes wet
That's awesome.
and not literally get their toes wet, but
Yeah, hopefully
Kinda-
got better
yeah.
shoes. Than,
Hopefully not those waders with holes in it.
yeah. So that's the biggest trip from the work standpoint. But personally,
we just got engaged,
yeah.
so
Hey.
that's a
Congrats.
trip.
that is quite the trip,
Thanks,
right?
thanks. And then, I mean, any chance I can get to go back down to California and hunt with my dad, or Lydia was talking about how her least favorite place to hunt was Hawaii. It was probably my favorite place to hunt ever. And any chance I can get back there
Yeah.
would be great. Yeah.
Well, we must know why it was just
Yeah, we got
Okay.
low on the list for
Okay,
you.
so here's my biggest thing. Multiple times now this has happened. Jimmy steals my sandwich, and it's
Was it like roast beef? Like, what were we talking?
no. So one time we were upland hunting in a place like pretty much like this in Eastern Oregon, and I am of the opinion that you do not have to hate your life when you're hunting or hiking or doing anything. Like even earlier we were talking about, I'm not like a thrill seeker. Like it sounds like I am because I read like horror novels when I'm trying to sleep in a little cabin. I'm reading about like a hunting cabin, but I'm really not like a thrill seeker when it comes to like physical activities. And so I like to enjoy my life while I'm outside and like take time to smell the roses and see the birds and like look at the mushrooms. And so I was taking my sweet time hiking up one of these beautiful hills in the Palouse in southern Washington or super far northern Oregon. And I looked up and Jimmy's already at the top of the hill. And it's about lunchtime. And my sandwich is in Jimmy's bag. So my sandwich is on top of the hill. And I was getting like, I have hypoglycemia, so I was like starting to get a little shaky, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? And so I ended up just like curling up in a little ball underneath the sagebrush and waited for him to come find me. So that was that. But Hawaii was almost the exact same thing. I asked Jimmy to pack snacks. So what did this man do? He brought like 3 granola bars. Thankfully people we were hunting with brought spam musubi, so like the spam and rice and seaweed, and those are delicious. But he didn't tell me. We got there at 7:30 a.m. The sun was like just coming up, and then we left at like almost 9. So we were out there. It was like a 12-hour day. It was longer than a 12-hour day. It was like a 12-mile hike down into the ravine, and so the second end was up.
Brutal.
Yeah, so like don't do that ever, like just in general. So anyways, we were wearing,
period.
I was wearing like nice boots too. Like I was wearing like my favorite Loa boots, and by the time we got up to the top, like they were just shredded because we're walking on lava. Super grateful for the experience because we were with one of our board members who's from Hawaii, was local there, and it was their first time actually taking non-locals hunting with them. So it was like a really like beautiful experience in that way. And I needed more food. I ended up sleeping on the dirt and almost getting trampled by the animals we were trying to hunt. It was like these like feral sheep. And again, I did the thing where I was like, withering away. So I laid down underneath a palm tree kind of thing. And all of a sudden like woke up to just like a stampede. I felt like in The Lion King, but anyways.
You were Simba?
Yeah, I was Simba.
Oh, wow.
And so anyways, it was just like exhausting and my body kind of gave out the next day. So my advice, always take lots of snacks, bring more water than you need, and know your limits, your physical limits, and talk to whoever you're doing anything with. Like make sure that you're on the same page about how long things are going to be and how much food you have.
Those are extremely
For life?
Yeah, for everything. Yeah,
life
naturally.
as well, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
He
shout
loved it,
outs.
though. It was
shout outs
beautiful.
that you all have.
I would give a
anyone.
shout out to Nature Owl.
Yeah, with the handle.
Shout out to Mom for allowing me to go hunting when I was little.
Mama
Shout out to
Dukes,
Mom.
Yeah, shout out to her for the love.
I want to meet your mom.
Hey, come on down to 336. We'll be there.
All right.
Last question. I would say it's more of a hard-hitting one, but what's the legacy you're hoping to leave? This can be individually or through Hunters of Color.
I want to be a good ancestor.
Okay.
I think a lot about, sorry, I'm gonna cry. I think a lot about what the outdoors have meant to me as like an escape almost. And if you haven't seen my tattoo, I'm Wolf Clan Mohawk, and I often think about this one time we were in Yellowstone and we went there and all I wanted to do was see the wolves, right? And like we went to the valley where they're supposed to be. We even saw like where they had been hunting the night before. Like there was this ring of blood in the snow. It was super intense where they had like walked around an animal and actually like there was the carcass in the middle. So cool. And I remember being so disappointed because we were there for like 7 hours and I was like, there's no wolves in Yellowstone. This is a lie. Like they sent us to the wrong place. Wolves don't exist. By the end of it, I was like getting really mad.
They don't exist.
Yeah, I was pissed by the end of it. But we were driving out and then a mile before we got to the exit, I look up on the rim, like I'd been doing the entire time, be like, oh, a wolf. And it was like a tree stump. We're like, oh, a wolf. And it's a coyote or bison. I was getting bison confused with wolves because I was so desperate at one point. But I looked up with the binoculars and I was like, oh, it's like a big coyote. And I was like, hold on. And I was like, that's a really big coyote. And I was like, and Jimmy's driving. I was like, stop the car. And he was like, what? And I was like, a wolf. And we literally see the exit. Like we had like minutes before we were out of Yellowstone. And I was like, there's a wolf. And I got out and it was just sitting there looking at the road. Like it was like looking at us. And I was like, is it okay? Like, why is it just sitting there? And I howled, just like, I don't know, because that's what I did growing up. That's probably why I didn't have any friends. And I howled, and this wolf responded, like, right away, and just sat there and looked at me, and I was howling at it, it was howling at me, and then it started calling to other wolves, and other wolves started howling, and so we just got, like, surrounded basically by the sound, not by the wolves, that'd be horrifying. But surrounded by the sound, and I was like crying, and I was like, oh my gosh, like they came to see me. Like it finally, like we were leaving, and they came to see me. And I remember Jimmy, I was like shaking because I was so excited and happy, and I was crying. And Jimmy was like, Lydia, they're your ancestors. Like this is your family. This is like, they know you, you know them, you know the land. Like take this energy with you.
Yeah.
And so I think about that all the time. Like I want that to be the energy that I leave and that I share with others too. Just to connect to the land in that way.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Beat that, Jimmy.
Yeah, Jimmy. Man, I am so sorry.
She likes to steal the show.
Let's see what you have, Jimmy.
I don't know. I think if I were to if people never got detached from their hunting culture, I'd be happy. Where folks can always see themselves represented, and it's always an option that you can do. So that's not, you don't have to be reconnected. That it's something that is easily accessible. And so that doesn't take like you reaching out to a family friend to pass the knowledge on, is that it's within everybody. But yeah, I'll keep mine short and sweet.
It's much more practical. I get that. Good.
I appreciate you both sharing
Yeah.
so much. Like this has been a great experience, and I think just stepping into this space and feeling welcomed into it is extremely important. So thank you for that gratitude, at least from me. Looking forward to many more opportunities to engage with HOC. So
Agreed.
Yeah, thanks. All the fire's out, so perfect timing.
we talked too long, right?
Yeah.
So much that the fire went out. So that's a wrap for us.
Yeah.
Another episode of Sincerely Yours Outdoors. Hunters of Color. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yawa.
Sweet.
That wasn't that bad, huh?
That was easy.
Yeah.
Didn't even cry except for twice.